GamingBolt presents 15 things hardcore players hate about Assassin's Creed Origins. Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed Origins has been out for over a week now, and players are mostly satisfied with its direction. The revamped combat, excellent environment design, enormous open world, and number of things to do has ensured that this comeback hasn't been wasted. That being said, there are still some things to nitpick about Assassin's Creed Origins, and we've compiled 15 such things here. Microtransactions. Even though Ubisoft said there would be no loot boxes, that doesn't mean Assassin's Creed Origins doesn't have microtransactions. There's an in-game store where you can pay real money to unlock weapons, different mounts, gear, and more. Granted, you can earn the required currency in-game as well, and it's not all that invasive, but it's still there. Poor facial animation. When looking back at Assassin's Creed Syndicate, it's amazing how much better the facial animations looked compared to Origins. Heck, even Assassin's Creed Unity looked kind of better, when its faces weren't glitching into monstrosities, of course. By comparison, Assassin's Creed Origins' facial animations come across as stiff and overly bot-like. Meh villains. For a game that's meant to be the beginning of a long-standing war between assassins and Templars, the villains in Assassin's Creed Origins are kind of just there. They monologue, they kill people, and their overall motivations form a major part of the series' theme, but for the most part, they exist to move the story along and nothing else. Largely disappointing story. Around Assassin's Creed 3, the overall story for the franchise started to waver in its quality. Even if the ancient history segments had some decent tales, the overarching story about Abstergo, the Animus, and more got worse. Case in point, the story in Assassin's Creed Origins, which trudges along. Layla Hassan is better as the present-day Animus operator than the past few games, but that isn't really saying much. Underwhelming presentation. One-note conversations. NPCs with little to no movement when Bayek is speaking to them. Ineffective cutscenes. Assassin's Creed Origins doesn't really try to sell you on its story. There are some decent subplots at play, but you don't really get a feel for the characters because of the presentation. Such are the sacrifices for a large open world, we suppose. Bugs, bugs, bugs. Speaking of sacrifices, bugs still run rampant. Endless loading screen bugs, crashes, NPCs glitching into the surroundings, Bayek talking to no one in particular, and much more plague Assassin's Creed Origins. Granted, your experience may vary, and it's not like other open world titles don't have bugs, but it's still kind of sad to see this game unable to overcome the buggy reputation of its series. Combat AI. Though combat is a definite step up from the previous titles, with a pseudo Dark Souls style of hack and slash melee fighting, the actual enemies aren't the brightest bunch. It's not all that hard to simply trap them in a corner and wail on them continuously. In addition to this, enemies tend to rely on the same patterns of attack. Mix it up every now and then, guys, come on. Multi-person fights. Despite the enemy AI, the combat can be fun. However, it suffers from being better suited to 1v1 fights. As more enemies are added, things can become tougher to manage and not in a gameplay sense. This is actually due to the zoom level and overall clunkiness of the camera. It's harder to really switch focus between enemies, making this a rather odd mashup of the old Assassin's Creed fights, but with Origins combat mechanics. Lack of content in some areas. Ancient Egypt as a whole looks amazing, and there are some genuinely cool things to find, from hidden tombs to constellation puzzles. However, the overall distribution of content and activities feels uneven. Some areas may be a little too similar to each other, but you may also find places which have very little going on and are pretty barren. Performance issues. Though Ubisoft has stressed that the game takes full advantage of its recommended specs, right down to CPU utilization, there are plenty of players experiencing frame rate drops and other performance issues throughout the game. And yes, that's for consoles as well, which also have texture pop-in. It's not game-breaking, but it does take the presentation down a notch. Clunky stealth systems. Even with the Assassin's Creed name attached, the stealth mechanics are very clunky in Assassin's Creed Origins. Whether it's poor AI, enemies able to see through solid objects, Bayek accidentally climbing onto something he's not supposed to, etc. Stealth is handled pretty poorly as a whole. Controls and gameplay don't benefit stealth. Continuing from the previous point, the game itself isn't really designed to reward stealth. Bayek moves a lot slower and less nimbly than the previous protagonists, thus making it tough to really parkour about. The action-heavy approach also ensures that fighting enemies head-on is a better option, which we'd be fine with if there weren't so many avenues for stealth that ultimately don't pan out. Level gating. Thanks to the addition of RPG mechanics like level gating, there are some areas where you simply do not do damage to enemies. Manage to sneak into a higher level fortress and want to promptly stab some people? Well, your hidden blade will pretty much tickle some foes, which really conflicts with the series' stealth. This also means that you need to go and grind for higher levels and loot, which some people may be fine with honestly, but your mileage may vary. Underwhelming loot. Okay, so the game is about completing side missions and main missions, getting better loot, and becoming a tougher fighter, correct? Well, the variety of loot isn't exactly something that action RPG fans will go crazy about. Statistically, they're better, but as of right now, there aren't a lot of weapons that fulfill crazy power fantasies for Diablo players. That is, aside from the Flaming Sword fans. Lack of innovation. Let's get this out of the way right now. Assassin's Creed Origins needed to happen, and Ubisoft needed to make significant changes to its open world. That's a given, and for the most part, the game is incredibly fun with some strong side mission design, decent combat when the scale is smaller, ample secrets, and a huge range of activities to do. However, Assassin's Creed Origins isn't reinventing the wheel or putting a more clever spin on mechanics like, say, The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. It's still a Ubisoft game with things to collect, bases to invade, and oddly written dialogue to endure, not to mention bugs. And hey, there's nothing especially wrong with that, but Assassin's Creed Origins is less of an evolution for the series than it is a pretty decent step forward. And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at GamingBolt, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.